These men go crazy. Legendary.
Perfect. Perfect.
the one and only Digo Double G.
Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg.
Da 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 da. You know I'm mobbing with the D-R-E. Da 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 da. It's the one and only Digo Double G.
Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg.
Da 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 da. You know I'm mobbing with the D-R-E. Da 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 da. It's the one and only Digo Double G.
Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg.
Da 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 da. You know I'm mobbing with the D-R-E. Da 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 da. It's the one and only Digo Double G.
Snoop Dogg.
Da 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 da. You know I'm mobbing with the D-R-E.
Smoke weed every day. Smoke weed every day. Smoke weed every day. Smoke weed every day. Hope you ready for the next episode.
Digo Double G.
Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg.
Da 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 da. You know I'm mobbing with the D-R-E.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know the West Coast is back for all you suckers. So put something in there. Put it in there. Yeah. Suck, Snoop.
Top dog, buy them all, yeah, I'm burning it up. DPGC, you should be turning it up. CBT, LBC, yeah, we hooking back up. And when they bang this in the club, baby, you got to get up. Cuz homies, thug homies, yeah, they giving it up. Low life, yo life, boy, we living it up. Taking chances while we dancing in the party for show. Slip my girl a 44 when she crept in the back door. Chickens looking at me strange, but you know.
What is up, party people? Alright, so let's see who is here. What up, Skyfly? What up, Davros? No name. What up, B-Ball? What up, opinionated asshole? What's up, the real vessel? And what up, Dartman? Alright, so nothing real big plans. Just wanted to go live, just hang out. Didn't see anyone on. I think Fight the Flat Earth is on, but let's keep it real. It's the same show every fucking day. Flat Earth talking about the same. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, if you want to join the panel, I do it over at the Discord server over at the bunker. The link is in my description, and Skyfly has so wonderfully helped me out and shared that link and get you into the server. I will verify you, and you'll be able to get on the panel. We have some people there. All right, and get over here. I'll turn the stuff on so you guys can see. All right, so like I said, if you want to join, the link is in the description. Like I said, open topic. Yesterday was interesting. Went from talking entropy or talking thermodynamics and kind of segued into a gravityless reality. But I segued out, so I'm not really sure what the conversation was about at that point. Again, anything's open as long as you have a scientific Otherwise, it's pseudo. And we can go from there. Let me see. Oh, before I forget, please check out. I just started that website, the Frontline website. I'm kind of getting used to how to run it and edit it and add and take stuff away. So I got an email on there, but give back on that. But go ahead and check it out. I'm gonna, as the time goes, I'll start adding a lot more to it. Right now, that was just the basic concept of what I want this website to become. So check it out. Let me know. Let me go ahead and see what is going on over at the Discord. What? Oh, gotta change it over still. What's up, guys? IP. What's up, guys? We're live. What are you talking about? Max Peas and Pools. Have you guys seen the chemicals that they get for assholes who call people out for that stuff? Yeah, it turns purple, right? Fiction for what? Doing what? What the fuck is a schnoodle? I refuse. You can't do my research for me? What I don't get is why do you guys decide to change your names? Well, it's not your name. Not your name either. But Jose didn't change his name. Jose Gonzalez. He didn't change his name. The math. Okay, so I did notice that you guys had been getting into it with Gleam in the chat. So what was the topic? Oh shit.
It wasn't me.
So you guys were talking about field of view?
No, his topic
was.
his topic of information was who is the most stupid person on the internet that doesn't qualify for dumb fuck of the year.
I think dumb fuck of the year should. I think everyone should be part of that. I don't know why they just pick flat earthers. I mean, Rumpus.
Yeah, but the thing is, that would be a one-horse race. They wouldn't pick anyone else. They'd just leave Rumpus.
So,
oh, and you missed our Karen B has proof of Sasquatch hair coming back to her DNA.
Oh well, trust me. I think she's dated Sasquatch. I think she said once. They kicked it and smoked a blunt. I think she said once.
I actually made up a new award. It's called Thick as a Brick. It's a Jethro Tull Award.
I no, that's a good award. I want to be thick.
Hey, Chonji, I think this is funny. How in the mornings you wake up and one day you say, let me see if I got any DMs on Discord and who tagged me at nighttime. It happens to you, right? Most of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you wake up and you got tagged like, hey, Shonji, like somebody is messing with me or whatever. So this morning I woke up and before I woke up, I got tagged twice by Right the Hand. I'm gonna read these two tags: 7:03 in the morning and 7:05 in the morning. When I wasn't still around, I was asleep. 7:03 in the morning. Remember that entire show you had on conversation and how the definition of words was the most important. And then when I tried to define words, you call me dishonest. You piece of shit, Jose Gonzalez. Whoa, 7:03 in the morning. And then he tagged me again 7:05 in the morning. He will talk about the light as a wave for 3 hours, but never define wave, Jose Gonzalez. That's why you're the dishonest taco meat.
That's funny because he rage quit. He rage quit and acted like an asshole the other day. And all I said to him was, keep it real. Stop using Santa Claus. That was the only
Dude, he rage quit today. He was asked a question by Brenda today. I said like, hey, that's a fair question. Can you answer it? He said like, I'm leaving, like, fuck y'all or something like that. He left, bro. Today he rage quit in my show. But these two tags was early in the morning when I was still sleeping. I say, what are you tagging me? And who's talking about waves on lights? Why are you calling me taco meat and piece of shit? What is wrong with this guy, man? He was something else.
I posted the definition of schnoodling in the chat.
That is fucking... That's got issues. I'm not reading that.
Why? Because it's too close to home, is it, Sean?
No, it's too close to gay.
Well, only you would know that.
Only people who read the definition of
Okay.
Yeah, but you just read it, Sean.
The guys that have been cut, they can't schnoodle. So they're missing out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fires another man who.
I'm sorry, I don't have that problem.
Well, I can stretch my ball skin all the way around over the top of my head of my dick.
I could literally just leave the Discord right now.
The thing is, that's saying something about Maxwell's sack. Are you suffering from old age sack sagging?
I got big balls. Can I say?
You should go on Dow's show. We will ask you if you shave or groom your bollocks.
I'm gonna give it like 3 more seconds, so you guys should get it right now. 3.
Hey, Maxwell, what's your favorite color?
1.
Green.
We're
Do you shave your balls?
Actually, it's fluorescent green.
Okay, so like I said, I could literally games. Fine with them, they can play games. Okay, so that one of the things that what happened yesterday, I was talking about with Right to Hand. I think it was yesterday or the day before. Jose's panel. We were talking about how Right to Hand takes it to these really far-fetched places. I don't get why he does it. I don't really talk to Right to Hand that much, so luckily I don't have to deal with it. Let me see here. Oh, you hear me? Oh, good. Okay, cool. I will censor the panel as much as I want, no name. Let's see what is going on. No, there was Dartman. Let's see what you sent me, Dartman.
Antarctica, a continent so far from any other landmass, beyond the wild Southern Ocean that for a long time we didn't even know it existed. It was only 200 years ago that humans finally laid eyes on it, and it was on small wooden ships like this.
When they sailed around Cape Horn, they sailed further and further south. Nobody'd been down there. All there was on the charts was ice. That was it. So they went actually off the charts.
First came the whalers and sealers. Then explorers like Scott and Shackleton, and nations started to claim territory. In the Second World War, the British government launched a top-secret expedition to defend its territorial claims to the Antarctic Peninsula and beyond. Port Lockroy was one of their bases, and it still stands today, a reminder that even here, the only continent that has never seen a war, geopolitics still matter. By the 1950s, 7 countries had claimed territories in Antarctica, some of which overlapped. It was a mess the Antarctic Treaty sought to overcome. It ignored the land grabs and put peace and science first. Now there are 30 countries with 82 research stations on the continent. But the science is also strategic. The UK isn't alone in sending the military to help with the logistics. This Hercules, flying over Britain's main research base, had dropped supplies to remote field camps by parachute.
Science has always been a proxy for geopolitics. Nothing's changed. So countries, for example, went to great lengths to put their Antarctic stations all over Antarctica and to raise national flags to say, we're here, we're busy, this is ours. Climate change is going to continue to place pressures on the Antarctic. It also means that countries like China are going to become increasingly dominant in demanding a voice about how Antarctica is governed. After all, cities like Shanghai will bear the brunt of sea level rise.
But Antarctica faces new challenges in the 21st century. Tourism is set to double, pressure on fish stocks is increasing, and there's always the risk of conflict spreading south. The Foreign Office says science is crucial to keeping the peace.
The reason we study it so hard is because the water that is going to melt from Antarctica will arrive around the coast of the UK. We're not complacent or naive that the treaty is the best thing ever, but the evidence shows that most states feel that they're better off cooperating within the treaty to understand Antarctica and have a say in how it's governed than trying to go alone.
In the 200 years since we've discovered Antarctica, humans have altered its climate, perhaps irreversibly. The treaty protecting it has never been so tested and never been so critical. Thomas Moore, Sky News, on the Antarctic Peninsula.
Yeah, so I was reading about that, and they were talking about. Okay, so I actually I remember, but I did a live stream about that, talking about how the Antarctic Treaty be done in 2048, and once that happened, that would basically mean that basically the land would be up for grabs. I was reading a bunch of articles that was talking about how China, like the whole Admiral Byrd thing, you know, with the whole fuel. I know he when he was talking about all the fossil fuels and stuff, and after, you know, the last blah 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 lifetime. Well, again, in 2048, when the Antarctic Treaty ends, that's going to be what's up for grabs. China's already come out saying that they have a bunch of new technology that they're planning on putting out that would basically help drill into the ice. There are science research centers that are becoming more, it's not, I wouldn't say militarized, but there's more of a military presence. I remember, if there's no one owns it, and there's no military like, you know, conflicts or you know, real claiming of land down there, why do we have a military within the science research centers basically are outposted inside those bases, basically? So I think there's always a good reason for, or I don't know if it's a good reason, but I know there's always a reason for why I feel, you know, there's a lot to come when it comes to Antarctica and the treaty. I'm trying to find another article or something on it, I actually think, hang on, because I was looking at one. Let me check my history real quick. Okay, here it is. One of these. Give me 1 second. Let me figure out which one it is. Where is it? Wrong one. Okay, so what I'm trying to find is they have there's like an animation of the ice sheet that's melting out there. One of the things that I noticed when they started talking about the ice sheets melting was also when they started talking about the different sheets cracking and sea level rise. Well, one of the things that comes along with the geoengineering stuff that I was talking about before is the fact that it not only blocks the UV, the radiation from the sun to warm the planet. Well, it also insulates the planet. It's also going to kind of keep the temperature up. So it doesn't make sense. A lot of the solutions they want to do, I don't know where the hell it is. So I think we're gonna say F it. One last. Oh, never mind. Can't find it. All right, last folder. Nope. Okay, never mind. So I think we talked last time I was here, or last time we talked about it. We were talking about how one of the aspects of this treaty ending would be obviously the fossil fuels, military aspects, and what that would basically, I guess, come to for it. I don't really understand, military wise, the benefit of it, but hey, apparently, your military's got to be everywhere for it. So let's see if I can find some more Antarctica. My apologies, guys. I wasn't really planning for a trollish channel. I didn't have anything planned to monologue. Because I'm going to try to find this video. And I don't find it. All right. So this is basically one of the scientists that talks honestly about geoengineering, Alan Robach, climate scientist. He's one of the very few scientists that are actually open about talking about effects of geoengineering. Like I said, because I wasn't planning on anything. One of the videos, so I figured, hey.
Can you give me the 30-second summary on geoengineering? I know that's hard.
People have proposed blocking out sunlight to reverse global warming, to reduce the amount of energy on the planet. And the ideas that are most being looked at are putting a cloud in the stratosphere like volcanoes do, or brightening clouds over the ocean. There are many risks involved with these, and there's no technology today to do it. But if it would work, it might cool the planet and reverse some of the negative aspects of global warming. The solution to global warming is mitigation, reducing the greenhouse gases that are causing global warming, carbon dioxide, methane, and the others. And that's the solution. It has to be done as quickly as possible. Absent that working, then one of the things we have to do is adapt to climate change. And absent that, there'll be suffering. Now, people have talked about something called geoengineering, which is either taking the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere after we put it in. That's called carbon dioxide reduction. That's probably a good idea. It's kind of expensive now, but that's not really that controversial. The other idea is blocking out the sunlight, and this would have a lot of risks associated with it, but it should not be done as a substitute for mitigation. It should be done only if mitigation doesn't work and we're reaching some sort of dangerous climate change that we might want to reduce temporarily while we get mitigation and carbon dioxide reduction under control. No, nobody is advocating geoengineering in the absence of mitigation. It's only added on to more efficiency, more conservation, more wind and solar, and because the carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for a long time, there's still going to be a certain amount of climate change. I don't even know whether it's a good idea. There's a risk to global warming, there's a risk to doing geoengineering, and we're still in early days of comparing the risks and see whether geoengineering would be even riskier than not doing it. We couldn't do it tomorrow because we don't have the technology. So the first thing to do would be to try and build a fleet of airplanes and infrastructure producing enough sulfur so that we could go up into the atmosphere, into the stratosphere, and spray sulfur out and create a cloud. We don't have the technology to do that. Some people say it's cheap and easy, but it's never been done, and so it would take a major development effort to develop the infrastructure to do that on a routine basis. The other idea is a fleet of ships in the ocean, perhaps autonomous, that would be powered by the wind and would take out seawater and turn into salt and spray salt into the clouds and making them brighter. Even if we could have a fleet of ships spraying salt into the atmosphere, we don't know if it would cool the planet. It might brighten some clouds, but it might have upward motion. You might have sinking next to it, and those clouds would evaporate, and the net effect might be more absorption of sunlight. We don't know what the pattern and the amount of salt and the types of clouds to see. That's an unanswered question. We don't know if we spray sulfur into the stratosphere, whether, rather than creating a lot of small particles, which would be effective at scattering sunlight, we might make larger particles. And instead of making more, we would make larger ones. The larger ones would be less effective at scattering sunlight and would fall out of the atmosphere faster. And you might have to do 10 times the amount that we would do if they didn't grow. And we may never even be able to put enough sulfur up to really be very effective. So those are unanswered questions, whether it's even possible. I have a list of 26 reasons why geoengineering might be a bad idea. So I'll mention a few of them. One of them is it would destroy ozone. Because there's chlorofluorocarbons in the atmosphere, and will be for decades to come, on the surfaces of these cloud droplets, they would release chlorine and it would destroy ozone, and we'd get more ultraviolet radiation reaching the surface. If we could cool the planet by blocking out sunlight, different parts of the planet would cool at different rates. And so you would cool the land more than the ocean, and in the summer, this temperature difference is what drives the summer monsoon. So you'd have less precipitation over India, less precipitation over China, a place where a couple billion people depend on this to grow their food. There would also be, globally average, a reduction of precipitation because as you cool the planet, there's less evaporation from sunlight. And that would, if you heat the planet with greenhouse gases, it makes the atmosphere more stable and works against the enhanced evaporation. So balancing the temperature causes a reduction of precipitation. If you want to keep the precipitation from changing, you get warming. Also, the regional distribution of temperature change wouldn't be uniform. So if you blocked out sunlight from a cloud in the stratosphere, you would cool the tropics more than the high latitudes. If you're worried about sea level rise, about melting ice sheets, you would have to overcool the planet to cool the Arctic and the Antarctic to stop the melting.
Give me one advantage just to contrast with those two.
So if it would work, it would cool the planet. It would reduce global warming, and it would reduce a lot of the negative aspects of global warming. It would slow sea level rise, it would slow stronger storms, it would slow enhanced droughts and floods. So all the negative impacts of global warming that we're worried about, if you prevented the planet from warming, it would reduce those if it would work. Now, there's another problem. What if you're doing it for a while and it seems to be working, and then there's this major drought in China or this major flood in India, and they say, oh, you damn geoengineers, you're doing this. Well, we say, you can't prove that. These are random variations that could happen anyway. I don't care, stop it. And so society might lose lose the will or the means to continue to do it, and the clouds in the stratosphere would fall out in a year, and you get this rapid global warming at a rate much faster than you would get if you had done nothing. And it's this rate of change which is really hard to adapt to, not just the gradual change. So the adaptation to this catastrophic rising, if you instantaneously stopped it, would be a danger. What are the ethics of geoengineering research? Should we actually be doing research? And there are some negative things about it. For example, it might take away resources from things that the planet should otherwise be doing, or it might be a path, building a path to implementation. But I think because we already know about it, we really have to do research so that we can learn what the risks are. And sometime in the future, if there's dangerous climate change, policymakers can actually make an informed decision rather than just panicking and doing it. So we have to be able to evaluate the risk, and that's the advantage of doing the research. How do we decide? What if countries in the north want it a little bit warmer to take the resources out of the Arctic, and islands in the Pacific that are already drowning want it cooler? How do we decide that? What if there's a big multinational corporation, a geoengineering corporation gets going? Whose interest would they have at heart? They want to keep doing it. So I can think of another, there are unexpected consequences. What don't we know? Donald Rumsfeld was right about one thing, there's unknown unknowns. What don't we know? Will we trust the only planet we know to have life on it to this one technology? There would also be unexpected benefits. But so there's a lot of, what about the moral hazard? What if people think that geoengineering is going to solve the problem of global warming? There'd be less push to do mitigation. It might work the other way though. If people find out about geoengineering and say, you want to do this crazy thing? Maybe it's a real problem. Maybe we should really worry about the problem so we don't have to do this. So those are issues that people are looking at too.
Okay. Cool.
So if I made a decision, or if it was a collective decision to do a geoengineering program, and you put, say, the kind of program I think makes more sense, we put about 1 million tons a year in, but let's say, you might end up killing many tens of thousands of people a year as a direct result of that decision. If I made a decision, or if it was a collective decision to do a geoengineering program, and you put, say, the kind of program I think makes more sense, we put about 1 million tons a year in, but let's say, you might end up killing many tens of thousands of people a year as a direct result of that decision.
In 2018, scientists will take bold steps to explore a technology that could reverse the effects of climate change.
It's an engineering project that would literally touch every living thing on the planet.
They're looking at ways to reflect sunlight back into space and cool down the Earth. Geoengineering is the pioneering science that could well be on everyone's lips in 2018.
The idea of geoengineering is the idea that humans purposefully influence the climate.
That's taking place among the scientific research community and move it into the policy sphere, because most policymakers really don't know anything, if at all, about geoengineering.
Ms. Sharp, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Cynthia Sharp was formerly the UN Secretary General's chief speechwriter on climate change. She's now
Senior Strategy Director at the Carnegie Climate Geoengineering Governance Initiative, C2G2 for short.
Why do we need your organization?
This conversation is too important, potentially too dangerous to leave to just the scientific community. These technologies have planetary-wide impacts. They will affect not just our generation, but generations to come for hundreds of years. This is a global conversation. It's an intergenerational conversation, and we need to have it now because we are at a very dangerous point in terms of options. Our role is impartial. Our job is to say, this is coming, be aware of it. Here are some issues that you might want to consider. Maybe having some kind of an international hold on solar geoengineering, or looking at some guidelines, some governance of how we research and do testing of these geoengineering technologies, or what kind of national legislation might we need on removing carbon from the atmosphere.
Why do you think the conversation with the politicians and the other social organizations is only happening now?
It's clear that even though the world has the Paris Agreement on climate change, we are still very, very far from where we need to be in terms of reducing global emissions and keeping our planet at a safe level under 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees. The gap there is enormous and very, very worrying. That is why there is increasing interest in the scientific community to talk about some of these technologies.
According to a group called Climate Interactive, the current pledges to the Paris Agreement still mean a global temperature increase of 3.3 degrees over pre-industrial levels by the year 2100. And that figure already includes some carbon removal techniques. So could it be that something like solar geoengineering is needed, even if we do reduce emissions? Back at Harvard, that
As the world's appetite for energy increases, securing adequate supply is the real challenge. Renewable energy is part of the solution, but the efficient production of fossil fuel is just as important and will be indispensable for decades to come. Today, there are more than 50,000 oil and gas fields in operation worldwide, which serve 55% of the global energy demand. The Linde Group draws on its leading industrial gases, engineering and technology expertise to enable the efficient recovery of oil, condensate and natural gas. Depending on a reservoir's specific conditions, primary recovery only produces about 15% of the original oil in place on average. To improve this recovery factor, pressure maintenance of the reservoir is key. The injection of water or gas in secondary recovery, also known as improved oil recovery, can increase the recovery factor up to 35%. Industrial gases such as carbon dioxide and nitrogen can be effectively applied in tertiary recovery, also known as enhanced oil and gas recovery, which can increase the recovery factor to as high as 70%. The use of both carbon dioxide and nitrogen is widely accepted as proven and continues to be applied with great success. Where do these gases come from? Carbon dioxide is produced from natural gas fields, chemical complexes, refineries, and power plants. Linde has experience in all major carbon capture technologies. Ambient air consists of 78% nitrogen, which makes it available anywhere and at any time. Nitrogen is separated from the air by air separation plants using a cryogenic process. To date, Linde has built more than 2,800 air separation plants, more than any other company in the world. The compressed air is first filtered, pre-cooled, and then purified by absorption. Next, the air is cooled to a liquefaction temperature of -182 degrees Celsius in cold boxes, a core component of the cryogenic process. After that, the rectification column separates nitrogen from the rest of the air. The final product, nitrogen, is compressed in the last step. Then, it can be pipelined to oil, gas, or condensate fields. Backed by outstanding engineering and operations expertise, Linde has the capability to design, build, own, and operate nitrogen supply facilities at any scale, from as little as 1 ton to tens of thousands of tons per day. Today, Linde is an established partner to oil and gas companies supplying nitrogen to the world's largest improved oil and enhanced gas recovery projects. The joint venture Elixir between Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, ADNOC, and Linde provides nitrogen for the pressure maintenance of ADNOC's condensate fields at Habshan, Abu Dhabi. Linde implemented a customized on-site solution delivering the highest levels of quality and reliability while complying with the strictest safety standards and achieving an impeccable safety record of 0 accidents. Commissioned in 2011, the plant delivers 20,000 tons of nitrogen per day, which is equivalent to 600 million standard cubic feet. To improve oil recovery for Mexico's national oil company Pemex, Linda built the largest multi-train nitrogen production complex in the world. Cantarell, one of the world's largest oil fields, is offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. The air separation plant generates 50,000 tons of nitrogen per day, which is equivalent to 1.5 billion standard cubic feet, with less than 10 parts per million oxygen, and delivers this gas through an onshore and a 100-kilometer subsea pipeline at 130 bar. Built within a nature preserve, this facility uses natural gas to generate its own power, seawater for cooling, and even potable water. It is self-sufficient for operations and many maintenance tasks. Linda has established true leadership in operational excellence and guarantees the highest standards in reliability, quality, and safety for the oil and gas industry. As a one-stop shop, Linda provides customized solutions. Linda is proud to have achieved reliable gas supply at the highest level for decades, offering integrated solutions at customer locations around the world.
Climate change is a reality, and as caretakers of the planet, it is our duty to do something about it. While there is no single solution, carbon capture and sequestration will play a major role. For many hundreds of years, average global temperature has changed very little. Since industrialization less than 250 years ago, it has risen by 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit, and this trend is set to continue. 1.4 degrees may not sound like much, but the consequences are enormous. Ice caps are melting, extreme weather conditions are on the increase, and damaged ecosystems are endangering the livelihood of millions of people. And this is just the beginning. It is now widely accepted that greenhouse gas emissions from human activity are the major contributor to climate change.
Climate change is a bit of a shock to us all, because we look at the planet and we say, it's so much bigger than we are, how could we be changing anything important? We're pulling carbon out of the ground as coal, oil, and gas, and it's going into the atmosphere after we burn it. It turns out that the carbon dioxide that is being added to the atmosphere is changing the climate. We are actually disrupting our own lives by our own actions.
The combined burning of fossil fuels for power generation and industry is the biggest producer of man-made carbon dioxide, or CO2 emissions, in the energy sector. There is overwhelming consensus from scientists, environmentalists, and elected officials that we must do something to address the problem. In some parts of the United States, new laws have been passed to encourage a reduction in greenhouse gases, especially CO2.
There are a range of things that one can do. Energy efficiency, conservation, land use changes, behavior changes, renewable powers, wind.
In a single year, in large pipes at high concentration, and you can...
Limits of global CO2 prevented from rising any further by the capital trapping and transport oil and gas
capacity here alone. So what does that really mean? Basically, it's a big number. We have hundreds to many hundreds of years worth of CO2 storage capacity if we took all of the emissions from fossil fuel-fired power plants and injected them underground into these storage reservoirs.
Mature oil and gas fields are ideal for sequestration. Saline formations also have tremendous potential. A number of demonstration projects have been conducted over several years around the globe. These same geological rock formations have trapped natural gas and oil beneath the earth for millions of years. Let's look at the technology in a bit more detail. The captured carbon dioxide will be compressed and transported via a pipeline to a suitable geological formation. For sequestration, the CO2 is injected more than half a mile down where the subsurface pressure maintains it as a liquid. When injected into the reservoir rock formation, the CO2 tends to rise within the rock as it is lighter than the surrounding fluids. Over time, several trapping mechanisms maintain the CO2 within the rock. During its migration through the reservoir, some residual CO2 is trapped between the grains in the rock. Eventually, the CO2 will rise to the top of the formation, where it is physically prevented from rising any further by the cap rock, a naturally occurring impervious barrier. Gradually, much of the CO2 will dissolve into the host fluids, whether they be oil or salt water. This dissolution causes the fluid, with the CO2, to sink lower in the rock formation, where over millions of years it will react with naturally occurring minerals to form stable minerals such as calcium carbonate. Once in this form, CO2 can never re-enter the carbon cycle, making certain that CO2 sequestration is safe and ecologically sound.
Is CO2 actually safe underground? Absolutely. That involves choosing a good site and operating it well, but CO2, we know, has been held underground in natural formations for hundreds of millions of years. The crust has mass, the crust has strength, and it's well suited to hold CO2 if you choose a good place.
In many oil fields, the CO2 enables previously unrecoverable oil to be produced. This enhanced oil recovery process can increase the amount of oil that might be recovered by up to 15%. A wide range of subsurface monitoring techniques can be deployed to track the migration of the CO2 within the rock and ensure that there is no leakage. A program of tests will be conducted before, during, and after injection of CO2 into the geological formations. All pipelines transporting the CO2 are also stringently monitored. Safety measures include automatic emergency shutdown valves at regular intervals so that in the unlikely event of a leak, sections of the pipeline can be rapidly isolated.
In the U.S., there's about 3,500 miles of high-pressure CO2 lines. One must take advantage of any right-of-ways that already exist for a CO2 pipeline, streets, utility lines, railroads, and the like. CO2 is not a poisonous substance, and it's not an explosive substance, so actually it's much safer than many of the products that we pipeline.
CO2 is non-toxic, but could it pose a threat to the potable water table or the greater environment?
CCS should not be a risk to groundwater. CO2 is normally emitted from the roots and leaves of trees and plants, so it's present in the soil zone at quite high concentrations. Most living things and most groundwater systems are tolerant to variations in CO2 concentration.
So why do we need to act now?
By the time my daughter graduates from high school in just 15 years, she will be living in a world where climate change is real. It will mean less water in the state of California. It may mean we write off very large coastal assets like New Orleans or Miami. The potential impacts of climate change are enormous, and we've already begun to see people who are migrating because of climate change. We've already begun to see habitats that are lost.
Where carbon dioxide capture and storage is so important is we're going to produce a lot of energy in this country, and we need more low carbon options so that a larger and larger fraction of what we build and use, and not just in this country but around the world, is a low carbon power. I don't have any doubt that we're going to build power plants. The question is, are they going to be clean ones?
While there's no single answer to solving the problem of climate change, carbon capture and sequestration is a vital part of the solution. Increased efficiency and a switch to renewable energy sources is vital, but while this transition takes place, we will continue to rely on fossil fuels to meet the increasing global demand for power over the next century. CCS could provide us with a quarter of the solution in combating climate change, and the technology is available now.
Of the world's population is responsible for more than half of global emissions. Climate change is primarily a matter of justice. At the Paris Climate Change Conference in 2015, all countries pledged to limit the increase in average global temperature to well under 2 degrees. But doubt soon began to set in about whether such a target was achievable. Advocates of the science known as geoengineering saw their opportunity. They assert that geoengineering could halt climate change by means of industrial-scale technological solutions. This would involve targeted and massive interventions in the Earth's atmosphere, the oceans, and the biosphere. There are two basic directions that potential manipulation of the climate could take. Solar radiation management involves activities that reflect the sun's rays back into space, so the climate heats up less. Carbon dioxide removal involves activities whereby the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide is sequestered from the atmosphere. The most widely discussed application of this kind on land is BECCS, which stands for Bioenergy with Carbon Capture and Storage. What is the underlying concept of BECCS? It is about the combination of two controversial technologies, bioenergy and CCS. Large areas of land would be turned into plantations for fast-growing monocultures, trees or crops selected for their ability to extract CO2 from the atmosphere. To meet the targets set in Paris, however, huge areas of land would have to be set aside. Indeed, the surface area required has been calculated to be that of India at the lower end and twice the amount of land currently used for global agriculture at the upper end. After felling or harvesting, the monoculture, trees or plants would be burned in power stations to generate electricity. The carbon dioxide released by combustion would first be captured and liquefied before being pumped into depleted oil and gas reservoirs or underground aquifers for final storage. In theory, at least, this method would filter one of the greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere on a gigaton scale. So what are the arguments against? The huge surface area required would drive up land prices and adversely affect food production. The result would be a sharp increase in food prices, and small farmers would lose both their land and source of income. The transformation of previously uncultivated land and prairies into monoculture plantations would destroy natural ecosystems and reduce biodiversity. BECCS could double global consumption of water and fertilizer, which would lead to additional emissions and water scarcity in many parts of the world. In order to create large tree plantations and fields, the soil must be plowed and tilled, which releases carbon dioxide. Tractors, harvesters, and transport generate additional emissions. The result would be a new resource and energy-intensive mega-industry. Furthermore, no one can know for certain at this stage whether and for how long liquefied carbon dioxide could be safely and reliably stored underground. It is therefore highly questionable whether BECCS would really remove CO2 from the atmosphere, and even if it did, then only with devastating consequences for human communities and for ecosystems, with great uncertainty as to the long-term effect. What is it that makes geoengineering technologies such as BECCS so attractive despite the drawbacks? It is because they offer the world the tantalizing prospect of a supposedly technological solution to climate change, which relieves them of the obligation to make drastic changes to their climate-damaging methods of production and patterns of consumption. Geoengineering schemes such as BECCS are a dead end that distracts us from the real solutions. What we actually need is a much more systematic reduction in emissions, as well as strategies that radically transform our economies. A rapid exit from fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas. Decentralized energy production from solar and wind. A worldwide reduction in the consumption of raw materials and energy. A transition from industrialized and fertilizer-intensive agriculture to agroecological food production. And there are other factors to consider. Our global ecosystems, rainforests, moorland and oceans, store large amounts of CO2. They need to be protected and conserved. In addition, damaged and degraded ecosystems must be extensively but carefully restored. We can do this by reinforcing the rights of those who have been using and safeguarding these ecosystems for millennia, local and indigenous communities, for whom our forests are not just a livelihood, but also their home. Above all, climate protection is a matter of justice. The oceans cover 4/5 of the Earth's surface. They are already the largest and most important carbon sink on the planet, storing around 50 times as much greenhouse gas as the atmosphere. To date, they and their highly complex ecosystems have not been fully explored. Some climate scientists are now proposing that global warming could be halted by means of geoengineering interventions in the oceans. Geoengineering is a term that covers large-scale, targeted interventions in the Earth's atmosphere, the oceans, and the biosphere. There are two basic directions that potential manipulation of the climate could take. Solar radiation management involves activities that reflect the sun's rays back into space so that the climate heats up less. Carbon dioxide removal involves activities whereby the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide is separated out from the atmosphere. In regard to the second option, climate scientists have proposed that the oceans could be used to absorb and store even more carbon dioxide than they already do. One such technology for carbon dioxide removal is so-called ocean fertilization. Under this plan, many thousands of tons of iron filings or other nutrients would be dumped in the oceans each year to stimulate the growth of plankton. These microscopic algae would then bind CO2 from the atmosphere and eventually die and sink to the bottom of the sea, thus taking CO2 out of circulation. In order to significantly influence the climate, huge areas would have to be fertilized, up to a quarter of the oceans. The impact of sowing artificial nutrient on such an industrial scale cannot be foreseen or quantified. That is because the plankton do not simply sink to the bottom of the sea, but are also ingested by other marine animals, and so the CO2 ends up in the atmosphere again via the food chain. There's also the danger of producing toxic algal blooms. Fertilization is intended to cause a massive growth of algae, but this is likely to deplete the supply of oxygen near the surface, leading to a mass extinction of fish. This would threaten the livelihood of fishermen and coastal communities that are dependent on an intact marine ecosystem. Another proposal for harnessing the oceans to control global warming is solar radiation management. Because the surface of the oceans is dark, it reflects much less sunlight than, for example, snow and ice. Consequently, the oceans absorb more heat energy, which they then release into the atmosphere. The idea behind solar radiation management is to increase the reflective capacity of the seas. One proposed solution involves distributing tiny light-reflecting plastic beads or foam on the sea or on the ice surface. The artificial brightening would then ensure that less solar energy is stored in the ocean. The downside is that, if solar radiation were to be reflected from the surface, all ocean-dwelling life forms would have to make do with less sunlight. The technological solution to a man-made problem would thus cause significant additional stress to marine organisms. Furthermore, such an artificial layer would diminish the oxygen supply in the surface water. Unlike other geoengineering technologies, marine geoengineering already has a regulatory framework. It is subject to the Convention on the Prevention of Marine Pollution by Dumping of Waste and Other Matter, London Protocol 1996. Ocean fertilization is specifically prohibited. Despite the above regulations, new experiments continue to be announced and partially implemented, for example under the guise of expanding local fish stocks for commercial purposes. The oceans are indispensable to life on this planet. They provide oxygen, regulate the climate, and are a source of food and income for millions of people. They are not a place for dumping carbon dioxide and other man-made waste, but rather a complex ecosystem that we have the duty to protect.
People have relied on the abundance of the ocean since the beginning of human history, but things are rapidly changing. Scientists project that by 2048, the ocean will be depleted and fisheries will cease to exist. Billions of people rely on fish as their primary source of food and income, a number that will continue to grow over the next few decades as the world population increases. A collapse of ocean fisheries will be a massive threat to the food security and well-being of life on this planet. Nations around the world are pursuing better management practices and sustainable fishing in an attempt to curb this loss, but it's not enough. Despite our efforts, the health of the ocean is decaying even faster than initially predicted. Moreover, we have discovered that overfishing is only part of the problem. To see the bigger picture, we have to go much, much smaller. The whole oceanic ecosystem obtains its energy, food, and nutrients from tiny green phytoplankton, microscopic organisms that play a critical role as the base of the marine food chain. They grow and multiply through the absorption of sunlight, alongside water, carbon dioxide, and micronutrients such as iron. Phytoplankton are the food of zooplankton, which in turn are consumed by small fish, which are themselves consumed by larger ones, and so on. For their health, phytoplankton depend on the natural fertilization of iron-rich winds and upwelling currents, which have been ongoing for millions of years. However, as a result of climate change, winds and currents are changing, and the oceans are getting warmer. This hinders the mixing of surface layers, separating phytoplankton from the nutrients they need to grow. A NASA study has shown a constant decrease of phytoplankton in the ocean, 1% per year since 1950. That means plankton has declined more than 40% in just 60 years. When phytoplankton are in danger, the whole ocean is in danger. Less plankton means less food for fish and other organisms. With the continual decline of plankton, we are facing the collapse of the marine food chain as we know it, due to climate change. The question is, what can be done? Over the last several decades, scientists have observed that the iron-rich dust of volcanic eruptions can create massive plankton blooms over deserted areas of the ocean. On several occasions, scientists saw the volume of wild fish in these areas increase significantly, far beyond expectations. Given these observations, experts began to consider what might happen if humans could mimic natural volcanic iron fertilization to boost ocean life. This process is known as ocean seeding. In a recent ocean seeding project, researchers added iron dust to an area of the ocean that was part of the migratory route of juvenile salmon. Only a year later, mainland rivers experienced one of the largest salmon returns in history. Ocean seeding offers an opportunity to begin repairing the damage to our ocean, rebuild wild fish stock, and improve food security for the growing populations of the world. This vital shift cannot be made without further research in ocean seeding and your support. Support us by sharing.
The little picture is from a nanofabrication study, which shows you can make very high quality, and do this in just a jet in a very simple way, make high quality alumina particles just by spraying aluminum vapor out, which oxidizes. So it's certainly in principle possible to do that. There's a big literature that's already looked at that. And you could do that by either building new versions of these aircraft or even re-engineering existing aircraft. So there's some ideas of that. So you go to an engineering firm and you want this done. They don't say this is hard or unusual. They say, okay, yes, we could do it. Aerosol geoengineering looks like it is so cheap that the cost is basically not going to be an issue. That means that implementation decisions will be risk-to-risk decisions. The risk of doing it against the risk of not doing it. And it makes the problem of how we govern it fundamentally harder and different and novel. So I've told you that it's cheap to deliver materials to the stratosphere, and I'm convinced that's true. I don't think that will change. But I think the more we do research, the less easy this will look, the more complicated the environmental effects will look, and that's a good thing, because right now it looks too easy. So I think that if we do more research, we're likely to find out that it's harder and more complicated than we thought, and that the side effects are harder to manage, and that's a healthy outcome that will make it easier to do the management. Of course, the opposite reaction is possible. It's an empirical question, how people will actually react to knowledge about this. Another reaction is to say, if these crazy scientists are so concerned about putting CO2 in the atmosphere, they want to think about these things, then that might actually mean we should be more serious about the risks of CO2 in the atmosphere. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids.
Numerous air quality studies, including from CARB, California Air Quality Resource Board, have named submicron-sized particulates as being particularly harmful for human respiration. Through all the discussions today, I have not heard any mention of this fallout, and has this been studied, and also the effects of a highly reactive metal like aluminum on toxifying soils and waters?
The question is, what would be the effects of these materials on human health if they came down into the stratosphere, in particular small particles and aluminum?
So the collaborators of mine working on the aerosol scheme are actually folks from Carnegie Mellon who focused on human health impacts. And while we haven't published it, that was the very first thing we did, was do the order of magnitude calculation in level pencil and paper, but with an expert on human health impacts about whether there could be an issue. And for aluminum or other particles, there are a lot of toxicological things that need to get looked at seriously. But if you're just thinking about the sheer number of particles and the human health impact of small particles, the answer is, well, we haven't published it. That was the first thing we looked at with some of the leading experts who do epidemiological research on human health impacts, and it's not even close to being an issue.
To clarify, so 10 megatons of aluminum dumped into the atmosphere would have no human health impact.
So let me be more careful here. To separate out the toxicological, so the alumina we've only begun to research and published nothing. Alumina we've only begun to research and published nothing. We haven't done anything serious on alumina, and so there could be something terrible that we'll find tomorrow. We haven't looked at it. We haven't done anything serious on alumina, and so there could be something terrible that we'll find tomorrow. We haven't looked at it.
I think the question is, how do you draw the line between some activity that is allowed and doesn't need global governance and activities that do require global governance?
Dr. John Holdren has agreed to serve as Assistant to the President for Science and Technology and Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I look forward to his wise counsel in the years ahead.
My personal opinion is that we have to keep geoengineering on the table. We have to look at it very carefully because we might get desperate enough to want to use it.
If you want a stable climate, you must stop putting CO2 in the atmosphere. Nothing about solar geoengineering changes that essential fact in any way at all. But fossil fuels are the core of those emissions, and it's tempting to think because we have to end fossil fuels that if you want a stable climate, you must stop putting CO2 in the atmosphere. Nothing about solar geoengineering changes that essential fact in any way at all. But fossil fuels are the core of those emissions, and it's tempting to think because we have to end fossil fuels that anything that distracts us from that is crazy. That's not quite right. The fact is that emissions cuts are absolutely necessary, but that's not the whole story. And the reason is the following. Emissions cuts are absolutely possible, very doable. We can get emissions to zero with confidence. The increasing low price of solar power is fantastic, and that combined with the youth activism we're seeing gives me some hope of real political change. The challenge is the following. Even on that marvelous day where emissions are finally brought to zero, which is absolutely doable, the climate problem is not solved. This is not a choice between doing things slowly or quickly. It's a choice about what we do. The reason for that is that climate risk is proportional to cumulative emissions of carbon dioxide. The more we emit, the higher the risk gets, whatever we do about solar geoengineering. When we bring emissions to zero, we have simply stopped building up that underlying risk. We have not eliminated it.
My guess is that once people, if the world did start to do it and there weren't any obvious bad effects, probably it would become more of a normalized part of climate policy and less of a high-profile thing. It would just become part of the woodwork.
I'm quite serious when I say what we need to do is to have a much broader research program with many more people in it to try and break some of the groupthink, and I truly don't have a strong opinion about what the right answer is.
Okay.
So in terms of solid, so first of all, I don't think, I mean, solid particles are, I think, a thing really worth exploring because it looks like they could produce some better results with less risk. Yeah. But does that mean that I would discount marine cloud brightening? No, I take that seriously too. And among solid particles, we've spent almost no effort right now being serious about optimizing. What we've tried to do is, at least for the first time, think hard about how solid particles would interact with the real background stratosphere. And to, you know, the one thing I think I've done the last little while is try and get people to think hard about the consequences of the warming the lower stratosphere, so that you might want to have particles that weren't so absorptive.
Okay, that's good. I mean, you mentioned the diamonds last night in the panel.
Yeah.
And I think it's a word that's easily digestible by someone outside.
So diamond is one of a handful of things. I mean, so you know, if you just do some kind of quick screen, you want things that are earth abundant, that have a highness refraction, and that are infrared transmissive, don't absorb, and that you know, seem to have good biological, you know, a limited toxicity. And so there are actually a bunch of papers on nanodiamond toxicity, and they suggest that it's very low and very safe. I'm not an expert, I haven't read it carefully, but at least like sort of the first order, you know, it passes that screen, where lots of things wouldn't, right? Like if you found that, you know, some heavy metal was a good geoengineering compound, you obviously would not even think about it because of the health impact. So, so the reasons to think that, for example, diamond might be good in that regard, but the question is, can you manufacture half-micron diamonds at a reasonable price? I really have no idea. So after 10 years of the kind of ramp that I was talking about, you'd want 10,000 tons a year or some number, a bit like that.
Okay.
Tens of thousands.
That seems quite small.
Yeah, well, they're pretty efficient scatterers. Yeah, maybe it's 20. I haven't done the math in my head. It depends on how quick the ramp is.
I was expecting you to say something in the millions as opposed to the thousands.
No. I mean, we're getting about half a watt per square meter for globally for 1 million tons a year. So in the millions would be, you know, several.
Climate change took its toll.
I don't think we want to do that right away. I mean, the delivery method would be figured out by, you know, a bunch of engineers who sharpened their pencils and did the work. And from what you know, from the study that we did, it looks to me like aircraft are, you know, substantially. Pardon?
It's a proposal. One option could be.
I think we're a long way from even making. I mean, proposal to whom? We're doing science, and we're doing engineering, and we're thinking about ways that we could reduce climate risks. But I'm not. I mean, if hybrid airships end up being cheaper, fine. I don't.
Yeah, but delivery is very important in terms of.
No, I think delivery is really an easy part of the problem. I think all the hard problems here are social, and the other problems are environmental. No, the delivery is probably the easiest and least interesting part of the entire problem. I mean, we just went to a regular commercial aircraft manufacturer. It's no big mystery, and you know, getting materials to the lower, even the lower tropical stratosphere is, you know, of order dollar a kilo kind of costs, and that means that even if you're going to do millions of tons of materials, you're talking, you know, billions, a few billion a year, and that's tiny compared to other costs involved in climate change. So it says to me that cost of delivery is not that big a deal here. But the point is, if you go to a regular commercial aircraft manufacturer and you ask about sort of what they think is commercial off-the-shelf things that are not pressing the envelope, getting up to 23 or so kilometers is, you know, essentially something that looks a bit like a re-engine business jet does it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a particularly controversial fact. If you want to go significantly higher in cruise, then there's new engine development. And there are certainly lots of ways you could do that, but that gets to be $1 billion proposition with some technical risk.
Okay.
But if you're talking just the sort of 20 kilometers, let's say, then there's really no question. I mean, there've been a bunch of developments. Each one of, I mean, here's a sign that it's not that hard. There's been a series of aircraft developments recently for high-altitude aircraft that have all done it more or less with off-the-shelf components, and they've all the ones that have tried have succeeded.
Okay.
I felt that the the UK government did a wonderful job trying to open up and try and stick its nose out and allow an experiment and talk about it. But I actually think that from what I know about the stage gate process and the whole sandbox that produced it, they really produced essentially a terrible outcome, because the very last problem we seem to have with solar geoengineering is it's too expensive. And so the idea that the first major engineering project that has an outdoor thing would be designed to make it still cheaper, I thought was sort of deeply misguided. And it much more sensible would be to work on things that reduce the risk or improve the efficacy. And by having the very first thing that they were going to focus on be cheaper deployment hardware, I thought was a really very poor choice of the British scientific community. More than unnecessary, sending profoundly the wrong message to their detriment. So I think it's really too bad it happened. And you know, I mean, I think the actual people doing it are totally well-intentioned, and the science involved in these tethers or engineering is really fun, but it's really hard to see that it's relevant to this problem. And the thermostat is not, I mean, I think that's not that helpful analogy. For one thing, there may be multiple thermostats in the sense that there's multiple, you know, climate's a many-dimensional thing. It's not just temperature, and it's not clear that there's a single entity that would be doing the controlling. And then, unlike a thermostat, where control is easy, in this case, control is much harder and inherently more noisy and uncertain. For most of the stratospheric things, it's a year or two.
So, okay, that's your committed cool.
I've ordered that. Well, no, this is this issue of what's called termination. So if you've ramped it up a long way, I think what you're committed to do is to balance. If for some reason one decides to stop, then you've got risks of the unmasked warming as you stop, and so you presumably want to ramp down in some more orderly way. I think it's absolutely vital if you're going to have, I mean, the only way to make any kind of sensible public decisions about this are to have, the discussion must be broad both in terms of the sorts of people involved, their backgrounds, but also broad in terms of broadening the topic, because you can't make sensible decisions about solar geoengineering just talking about solar geoengineering. It is intimately connected with questions about the other ways we might respond to climate, and more broadly with big questions about how we conceive of living on this planet and shaping it or being shaped by it over the next century. So you have to have those big conversations, or you won't get to any kind of crude consensus about what might be the right thing to do. Oh, just that if you do SRM, the world ends up releasing less CO2, say, from the ocean than it otherwise would have.
crazy. Legendary.
Perfect. Perfect.